So you said that in 20, 30 years from now, we have totally different situation. So the difference will be bigger than the past differences. So we cannot rely on the current situation to come up with the vision or solution. But we have to see what situation will be there in order to come up with roadmaps or the policies to reach there. So how can we start and how we can deal with that situation?
Although some aspects of the system are subject to very rapid change, cultural, political arrangements can change almost overnight. Other things have a certain continuity in them. So, for example, demographic projections are relatively good. We don't know precisely about trends in birth rate and death rate, but because the average Japanese citizen lives for such a long period of time, most of the people who will be alive in 2030 are already alive today. So we can look around and what we know is 20 years from now, they will be 20 years older than they are today. I mean, this is for sure. So we can start to build in some of these projections. Demographic projections, quite useful. Climate change is going to introduce some significant changes in your agricultural productivity. Nonetheless, we know that Japan isn't going to have suddenly twice as much arable land as it has today. And so we can start to think about the landmass continuity and what does that do. Technology changes on the margin very quick. Somebody can come out of a laboratory with a new idea almost overnight. But for this technology to have an influence, it has to be put into capital plans. You have to train engineers to service it. You have to educate the public to demand it. You have to create the factories to produce it, and this takes a long time. And you know, most of the buildings which are in Japan 20 years from now exist already today. So we start from those things where we see continuity and see where they take us. When I said there will be big change, I meant mainly in the political and to some extent cultural realm. People's understandings about their material needs, the ideas about governance, these things will change a lot. There was announced this morning in the news a secret German military study about energy futures. And in that study, they said there's a strong chance democracy will disappear over the next 20 years under the impact of pressures from peak oil. You see. So my point was not that you should, I was not saying you should not think about the future, but only don't imagine that the solutions which we can develop have to work under the current political and cultural system. You know, I see, for example, sometimes people say, well, in a democracy you never could do something like that. But you see, I don't think there will be a democracy 30 years from now. And I know this is a very shocking idea, but you know, just think about it. In 1900, most of humanity had been living under kings and emperors for hundreds of years. In the case of Japan, for over 1,000. Everybody imagined that the royal system is the natural state of affairs and goes on forever. And over a few decades, actually in Japan it took until the Second World War, but in Europe, in China, in Russia, it only took 2 decades until about 1920. In 2 decades, the Austro-Hungarian emperor disappeared, the Russian Tsar disappeared, the Chinese empress disappeared, and so forth. It shows you how quickly things can change, and we will see that same kind of change again, for sure.
Wow.
You know, our species has been on this planet for something like 200,000 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
That means 10,000 generations. And do we think that this system which we developed over the last generation or 2 generations somehow is the end of our evolution? I mean, this is just a silly idea.
Right. So everybody has their own mental model about the culture or governance system and others. So they're resisting to other ideas. So, for example, back in 1972, when we wrote Limit to Growth, many people couldn't understand or couldn't accept the idea that we are facing the limit to growth. So some of the people, including you, can see this future, which is totally different from the present status. But majority of people cannot see or cannot accept that. So how can you communicate, or how can you tell them and in your experience of limit to growth and the...
Well, telling people is easy. I do it all the time.
Yes.
Doing that in a way which causes them to understand, that's difficult. And getting them to understand in a way which causes them to behave differently,
Yes.
it's almost impossible. I would say it is impossible. I would say we are not going to solve these problems by having every single person understand it and start to behave in a different way. Why do I think that? Well, you see, behavior doesn't come only from the information that somebody tells you. Behavior comes out of your culture,
Yes.
your habits, out of the expectations of the people around you. It comes from the ideas that you get in the media, from books. These things have a very slow rate of change. So even if I come running up and tell you something new, 99% of your life is still the same old thing. And so, of course, your behavior is going to be the same old thing.
But at least you have to change the mental model or ideas of the policymakers. General public cannot change their ideas and behaviors, but unless we have right policies, we cannot solve the situation.
Yes, if we don't have the right policies, we will have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So, my current understanding is, of course, there will be change. I said so before.
Yeah.
Climate change, energy depletion, growing gap between the rich and the poor, other kinds of environmental damage which we are doing, the changing relationship between who controls oil and who wants oil. These things will force change. The question is, will our so-called leaders change proactively because they look ahead and see the problem and try to do something to avoid it? Or will they change reactively because they wake up one morning and suddenly it's an intolerable situation and they have to do something? History tells us it will be the second.
Right, I know that. But if we, as the concerned individuals, would like to change that situation, what we can do? For example,
if we want to make change. So first of all, it's important to focus on problems, which I call universal problems. Universal problems are those problems which affect people everywhere, but can be dealt with locally. Air pollution is a universal problem. the whole world has air pollution problems, but in Tokyo or in Kyoto, you can clean up the local air without waiting for Beijing or Mexico City to do it. Not climate change. See, there's no way that in Kyoto or Tokyo you can stop climate change unless also in Mexico City and Beijing they do it. So focus on those problems where you could, in theory, have some possible impact. First thing. Second thing, I think, is to understand that we don't do things causing problems because we're stupid. Anytime you see a persistent behavior, whatever it is, CO2 emissions or excessive use of energy or anything, there's strong reasons for that. There's are important organizations who benefit from it. There are people who get ego satisfaction or power or profit by doing it. And so if you think somehow that you just have to tell people the right way to do it and then everything is going to change, you will be disappointed. Realize that we really have to change the whole system, and it takes a long time. On the other hand, do realize that a small group of people working together with a long-term perspective can bring phenomenal change. It's absolutely possible to produce a real revolution. So the situation is not hopeless, but you just have to focus on those things where you really could possibly have some impact.